Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. Today we're going to be comparing Richard Dawkins and Jack T. Chick. If you don't know who they are, Richard Dawkins is a popular explainer of science who has made a name for himself as one of the faces of the new atheism, perhaps best known for his book, The God Delusion. Jack Chick is a Christian fundamentalist famous for publishing small gospel tract comics promoting Christian fundamentalism. He's also got some full-color comic books which are quite entertaining. At first glance, it might seem unlikely that these men have much in common, past being intellectual bantamweights with a fondness for ahistorical explanations of religions. But in fact, both men share a very interesting character trait, which shapes a great deal of how they see the world. They're both convinced that the world fits inside their head. I mean that metaphorically, of course. They're convinced that they're capable of understanding everything worth knowing about in the world. The result is that they are both men of one idea. Jack Chick thinks the Bible is a hammer, and all the world is a nail. Richard Dawkins thinks that science is a screwdriver, and he intends to screw the world. But neither man admits the possibility of there being anything in the world for which his chosen tool is not suitable. The result is a strange sort of madness when they do run into things which they manifestly do not understand. To see what I mean, let's consider an example from both. First, from Jack Chick, in his tract Big Daddy. Incidentally, while I won't go into details because it's rarely a good idea to plunge into two rabbit holes at once, it is amazing how similar reading Richard Dawkins debunking the Bible and Jack Chick debunking evolution are. Both know nothing of what they're talking about and rely on verifiably false authorities. Both also assume the stupidest possible interpretation to what they're debunking. Chick gives evolutionists a little bit of credit. And both assume that the proponents of what they are debunking are unfamiliar with their own beliefs. Anyway, back to Big Daddy, which is admittedly primarily an anti-evolution tract, but there's a really interesting tangent he goes off on, which is a perfect illustration of what I mean when I say that to Chick, the Bible is a hammer and all the world is a nail. Sir, what is the binding force of the atom? Is gluons. Gotcha. Wrong, sir. Gluons are a made-up dream. No one has seen or even measured them. They don't exist. It's a desperate theory to explain away truth. We know that the electrons of the atom whirl around the nucleus billions of times every millionth of a second, and that the nucleus of the atom consists of particles called neutrons and protons. Neutrons have no electrical charge and are therefore neutral, but protons have positive charges. One law of electricity is, like charges repel each other. Since all the protons in the nucleus are positively charged, they should repel each other and scatter into space. If gluons aren't the answer, what is? I don't know. I'm sorry, sir, but I can't hear you. I said, I don't know. You tell me. Sir, may I quote from the Bible? Yes, yes, yes! It says that Christ, the Creator, is before all things, and by him all things consist, are held together. I hope you don't mind the dramatic reading, but there's just something about Chick tracts which demand it. Anyway, the point is not Chick's poor understanding of physics, but that when faced with a physics problem, like how do protons stick together in the nucleus of an atom, despite the enormous electrical pressure driving them apart, he doesn't even consider that there might be a physical solution. He goes straight to the Bible. Since the Bible is not a physics textbook, he does have to be a bit creative. The few words, not even a full sentence, he quotes from the letter to the Colossians, is about how Jesus is primary over all of creation. If you don't believe me, just listen to it with the sentence before it included. He is the image of the unseen God, the firstborn of all creation, for in him were created all things in heaven and on earth, everything visible and everything invisible, thrones, ruling forces, sovereignties, powers. All things were created through him and for him. He exists before all things, and in him all things hold together, and he is the head of the body, that is, the church. This has nothing, whatever, to do with explaining the mechanics of how protons stick together in an atom's nucleus. St. Paul was in no way talking about the particular nature of matter. And right now, I can almost hear Dawkins claiming that I'm one of those sophisticated believers who's trying to reinterpret scripture to avoid conflicts with science. This is one reason why I'm comparing these two fools. This would be as stupid as claiming that a baseball coach who was giving advice on how to throw a curveball was only trying to cover his tracks because his explanation of the curveball conflicts with the concept of spin in quantum mechanics. No. There is more than one thing in the universe people like to talk about. And I know I'm not using an actual example from Dawkins. I'm basically putting words in his mouth right now, so take this with a grain of salt until I give an example in Dawkins' own words. But this is a perfect illustration, where it is not conceivable that a person could be talking about something other than what Dawkins or Chick would have been talking about if they were the ones who said it. Which is the basic problem with Martin Luther's doctrine of sola scriptura. It's Latin. Loosely, it means by scripture alone. That is, the scriptures are the only authority. And in the hands of somebody like Jack Chick, who cannot doubt his own interpretation, nor even conceive of there being other interpretations than his, this just means that he is the only authority. Sola scriptura was not originally meant as a license to just make up whatever one wants, but in practice, that is one of the major uses of it. And, well, actually, it was originally meant to let Martin Luther make up whatever he wanted, but let's not go down that rabbit hole either. And if you read more than a little bit of the God Delusion, not only do you see this exact attitude towards the Christian scriptures, minus the belief they're true, but you also find a sort of parallel attitude towards life, which might be called sola scientia. And here I will quote Dawkins from the God Delusion. Martin Rees, the distinguished Cambridge astronomer who I have already mentioned, begins his book, Our Cosmic Habitat, by posing two candid ultimate questions and giving a Noma-friendly answer. The preeminent mystery is why anything exists at all. What breathes life into the equations and actualizes them into a real cosmos? Such questions lie beyond science, however. They are the province of philosophers and theologians. I would prefer to say that if indeed they lie beyond science, they most certainly lie beyond the province of theologians as well. I doubt that philosophers would thank Martin Rees for lumping theologians in with them. I am tempted to go further and wonder in what possible sense theologians can be said to have a province. What expertise can theologians bring to deep cosmological questions that scientists cannot? In another book, I recounted the words of an Oxford astronomer who, when I asked him one of those same deep questions, said, now we move beyond the realm of science. This is where I have to hand over to our good friend the chaplain. I was not quick-witted enough to utter the response I later wrote. But why the chaplain? Why not the gardener or the chef? Why are scientists so cravenly respectful towards the ambitions of theologians over questions that theologians are certainly no more qualified to answer than scientists themselves? And a little later, perhaps there are some genuinely profound and meaningful questions that are forever beyond the reach of science. Maybe quantum theory is already knocking on the door of the unfathomable. But if science cannot answer some ultimate question, what makes anybody think that religion can? And then about 100 pages later, the same basic idea, this time about theologians' response to his proof for why there is almost certainly no God. For better or worse, I attended 2 days at the Cambridge conference, giving a talk of my own and taking part in the discussion of several other talks. I challenged the theologians to answer the point that a God capable of designing a universe, or anything else, would have to be complex and statistically improbable. The strongest response I heard was that I was brutally foisting a scientific epistemology upon an unwilling theology. Theologians had always defined God as simple. Who was I, a scientist, to dictate to theologians that their God had to be complex? Scientific arguments, such as those I was accustomed to deploying in my own field, were inappropriate since theologians had always maintained that God lay outside science. This is a man who cannot comprehend that there is anything in life that cannot be understood through science. So much so that when theologians talk about theology not being in the realm of science, he can only understand this to mean that it is made-up nonsense. He is a man of one idea, and other ideas are just not thinkable to him. And if you look at either Jack Chick or Richard Dawkins, you can see what Chesterton described in The Madman, whose mind runs quickly for not being hampered by the complexities of life. Dawkins just steamrolls over every objection he faces. He's sort of vaguely notices them in his path, but reading him is a bit like watching a Mr. Magoo cartoon.
Armand's Men's Shop. Last refuge for men of good taste. Yeah. Now then, sir, what do you have in navy blue?
There is, however, a huge advantage which both men get from this near blindness of theirs, and it is monumental certainty. If you read more than a little bit of them, they almost sweep you up and carry you along. They are so confident that you almost can't question them. You can, of course, and in fact if you do, the whole thing falls apart, but neither of them write to convince skeptics, even to convince disinterested people. Both of them find people who are looking for a certain sort of support, really primarily an emotional support. It's why you find so much satire in Chick and sneering in Dawkins. Both of them are selling what they've got by attacking the people the reader dislikes. They are, essentially, offering themselves up as a leader for followers to follow. And in the same way that the kings in the ancient world were often the biggest, strongest, and especially the most aggressive warriors, aggression is actually worth a lot more than mere size or strength in a battle, though everything has its limits. Both of these men attract followers by seeming like successful warriors. It's not even that a successful warrior would protect his followers, it's that a successful warrior will do great things and bring glory and honor, and in the ancient world wealth, to his followers. And this is especially the way that both Dawkins and Chick seem so very similar to me. They don't really have arguments for their positions. I mean, not really. They have things that look like arguments. They are at least wordy, impassioned disputes. Chick saying that fundamentalist Christianity is true because Jesus is the binding force of the atom isn't really an argument. And Dawkins saying that if God existed, he would have to be unimaginably complex isn't really an argument either. They both sound kind of like arguments, in that there's stuff said before the conclusion, and that's vaguely the shape of an argument. But the premises aren't obviously true, and they don't establish them to be true, and the conclusion doesn't follow from them anyway. But in neither case is that the point. They're doing combat with their enemies, and they're demonstrating vigor. A great many people in this world don't really see a reason to get out of bed in the morning, and so they are very drawn to people who do. But people can get out of bed in the morning for all sorts of reasons. Saints do it for the right reasons, but sinners do it too, and often for the wrong reasons. And monomaniacs like Dawkins and Chick get out of bed in the morning because beating people up is fun, and in their extreme myopia, they think they're succeeding. If you watch a full Mr. Magoo cartoon, you'll notice he's a very happy fellow. It's only the people who suffer for his mistakes who are dismayed. That's all for now. Until next time, may you hit everything you aim at.